I mean, I really want you to put yourself in this exact moment. Just picture it for a second.
Okay, setting the scene. I like it.
Right. So it is the blistering heat of November, and we are in the 1920s. We are at the absolute peak of the golden age of archaeology, but for the people actually on the ground, it does not feel golden at all.
No, not at all. It feels like dust and just total exhaustion.
Exactly. Total desperation. The air in the Valley of the Kings is just thick with grit. And then there is a sound that literally hasn't been heard in over 3 millennia.
Oh, that's such a heavy thought. 3,000 years.
Yeah. And I want you to imagine the audio track to this moment in your head right now, like the sound of desolate, whistling desert winds, mixing with this heavy, echoing, just agonizing grind of a massive stone tomb door sliding open.
I can hear it, just that deep scraping stone.
Right. And underneath that, there is this low, unsettling drop in frequency that just rattles your chest. It's this rush of trapped, ancient air finally escaping into the modern world. And almost immediately after that seal is broken, the bodies of the discoverers start piling up.
It really is the ultimate threshold. You are crossing from the world of the living into a space that was specifically engineered to remain sealed for eternity.
Completely engineered for that. Welcome to Haunted Podcast. I'm your host, Gary, and I'm joined by our resident expert, Emily. Today, we are stepping into the shadows to explore the unexplained, the uncanny, and the mysteries that history left buried.
We really are, and this is a big one.
It is. We all know the Hollywood version of the mummy's curse. I mean, you have seen the movies, you know the whole pop culture trope. But today, our mission is to uncover the terrifying, completely unvarnished reality buried beneath the sand.
We are looking at everything today.
Yeah. We are going to look at biology. We're going to look at the very real possibility of genuine paranormal phenomena.
Yeah.
And we are going to explore a scientific hypothesis so staggering it actually involves ancient, highly radioactive containment bunkers.
It is a wild ride, for sure.
But hey, before we cross that threshold, I need to ask a quick favor. If you are watching this on YouTube, please go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell. It seriously helps the algorithm, and it ensures you never miss one of our deep dives into the unknown. You really do not want to be left in the dark when we uncover these stories.
It really does make a huge difference for us. I mean, the engagement tells the platform that these are mysteries worth exploring. And trust me, for anyone listening right now, today's journey is one you will want to hear from start to finish. We are peeling back layers of history that fundamentally challenge our understanding of the ancient world.
Absolutely. So let's set the scene and just let's unpack this. To really understand the hysteria of the curse, we cannot just look at the bodies.
Right. You have to look at the context.
Exactly. We have to look at the pressure cooker that was the discovery itself. So we are in 1922. Howard Carter is our focal point. And, for anyone who pictures Carter as some glamorous, swashbuckling Indiana Jones type figure, we need to completely erase that image.
Yeah, that is a total myth. The reality of Howard Carter is far more grueling.
Just brutal work.
Completely brutal. This is a man who has spent nearly 30 years in the unforgiving environment of Egypt. He is living in this modest mud brick house.
Baking in the sun.
Exactly. And he has spent decades just mapping grid after grid in the Valley of the Kings. He is moving thousands of tons of sand and rubble by hand and largely finding nothing but empty, plundered holes.
For 30 years. And, he is not doing this with unlimited resources either. He is operating on the dime of Lord Carnarvon.
Right, the wealthy benefactor.
Yeah, Carnarvon is this fabulously wealthy, aristocratic antiquities collector. But, by 1922, the post-World War I economy is really biting.
It was a tough time financially, even for aristocrats.
Exactly. And Carnarvon's patience, and honestly his wallet, are completely empty. So he brings Carter in and gives him this ultimatum. One final season. One last year of funding.
No pressure, right.
Right. If he doesn't find this phantom king, Tutankhamun, which, by the way, many prominent Egyptologists at the time didn't even believe existed, the funding is cut. The 30 years of work will end in total failure.
The psychological pressure there must have been immense. I mean, Carter is staring down the end of his entire life's work.
Yeah.
But then on November 4th, 1922, the breakthrough happens. And the irony is, it wasn't even Carter who found it first.
This is my favorite part of the story.
Right. It was a young boy, a local water carrier, working with the excavation crew. He was just resting his water jars in the sand, and he literally stumbled upon a set of stone steps carved into the bedrock.
That detail always amazes me. The greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century was found by a kid just carrying water.
It really puts things into perspective.
It totally does.
Yeah.
So Carter rushes over, they clear the steps, and they find a sealed doorway. And here is where Carter's discipline is just astonishing to me.
Oh, absolutely.
He finds the doorway. He can see the royal necropolis seal is completely intact. He absolutely knows, he has found an unplundered tomb. But he doesn't break it down. He literally stops.
He stops dead in his tracks.
Yes. He wires Lord Carnarvon in England and actually waits for him to arrive by ship.
It took over 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks of Carter sitting in the blistering desert guarding this door.
Wow.
I mean, knowing his entire legacy is just inches behind that stone, but refusing to open it until his patron arrives.
The self-control is just unbelievable. I would have kicked that door in on day one.
Most people would have.
But finally, late November, Carnarvon arrives. They go down the steps, and, Carter's hands are visibly trembling as he takes an iron rod and chisels a small hole in the top left corner of the door.
The tension must have been so thick you could cut it with a knife.
Oh, yeah. He holds up a flickering candle to peer into the darkness. Carnarvon is standing right behind him, practically breathing down his neck, just going crazy with anticipation. And Carnarvon asks, "Can you see anything?"
And Carter replies with what has basically become the most famous quote in archaeological history. He says, "Yes, wonderful things."
Wonderful things, man. But if we pause right there, think about the sensory overload of that exact moment.
It wasn't just visual.
No, not at all. When Carter wrote about it later, he didn't just talk about the gold. He described the air, the hot air escaping from the chamber, air that had been trapped, stagnant, and sealed for over 3,000 years.
Right.
It rushed out with such force it made the candle flame violently flicker. And as his eyes adjusted to the gloom, these shapes emerged from the mist,
Yeah, the animal statues and everything.
Exactly. Strange, hybrid animal statues, jewel-studded chests, alabaster vases, and just everywhere, the glint of pure gold. Ultimately, this leads them to the burial chamber and the pure gold coffin of the boy king Tutankhamun.
It was a perfect, completely unprecedented time capsule. But, we have to recognize that almost the exact moment the tomb was breached, the narrative on the ground began to shift.
This is where it gets dark.
Very dark. The local Egyptian workers, the people who actually understood the cultural weight of what was happening, they felt an immediate shift in the atmosphere. The triumph turned to dread very quickly.
Yes, the first omen. And, this is a historical detail that often gets totally scrubbed from the sanitized academic history books.
They definitely like to leave this part out.
They really do. So right around the time the tomb is opened, Howard Carter has a pet canary. He bought it in Cairo, basically to bring good luck to his house.
Which is pretty standard.
Right. But on the very day the tomb is breached, a royal cobra sneaks into Carter's house, gets into the cage, and eats the canary.
Which, to the local workers, was incredibly significant. I mean, we really have to look at the semiotics of ancient Egypt here.
Right, because it's not just a snake.
Exactly. The cobra isn't just a dangerous local snake. It is the uraeus. It represents the protective goddess Wadjet. The uraeus is the ultimate symbol of the Egyptian monarchy. It is literally the snake worn on the front of the pharaoh's crown, specifically to spit fire and strike down the enemies of the king.
Exactly. So think about it. If you are a local worker and you just helped break into a pharaoh's eternal resting place, and that very afternoon, the living symbol of the pharaoh's protection enters the lead excavator's house and kills his bird.
You do not see that as a random act of nature.
No. You see that as a targeted, undeniable omen. It is a warning shot across the bow.
And that warning shot really seemed to materialize into reality just a few months later, because in April of 1923, Lord Carnarvon, the man who bankrolled the entire desecration of the tomb, is dead.
The timeline there is just so tight, it's crazy. He gets a mosquito bite on his cheek, and then he is shaving in his hotel room in Cairo, and his razor slips.
Just a tiny mistake.
Right, just a slip of the hand. He accidentally slashes the bite open, and, in an era before antibiotics, it gets horribly infected. The infection leads to blood poisoning, specifically a bacterial infection called erysipelas, which spreads rapidly and develops into severe bilateral pneumonia. He dies in agonizing pain in Cairo.
The global shockwaves of Carnarvon's death really cannot be overstated. You have to contextualize this within the 1920s,
Yeah, set the stage for us.
So Egyptomania was at an absolute fever pitch. The Roaring Twenties were completely obsessed with Egyptian aesthetics. It influenced fashion, architecture, jewelry, and even early cinema.
Everywhere you looked, it was Egyptian motifs.
Exactly. So when the primary benefactor of the greatest Egyptian discovery in history drops dead suddenly right after opening a sealed tomb, well, the world's imagination simply caught fire. It was the perfect storm for a massive media frenzy.
But, okay, let's logically break this down for a second, right? Let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Comparing this to modern science.
Right.
If you open a 3,000-year-old sealed chamber, you're essentially cracking open a biological time capsule.
That's a good way to put it.
If you lock up a room for millennia with organic offerings, mummified flesh, and completely stagnant air, aren't you bound to unleash whatever pathogens or toxic bacteria were trapped inside? From a purely biological standpoint, it makes total sense that it might be physically dangerous.
Scientifically, yes, it makes perfect sense.
But the 1920s media didn't care about microbiology. They wanted a supernatural narrative.
Well, they absolutely did. And the media landscape of the 1920s was chaotic and highly sensationalized. When Carnarvon died, you had prominent figures instantly jumping into the fray to fan the flames.
Right.
For instance, Marie Corelli. She was a massively popular novelist at the time, outselling even H.G. Wells and Arthur Conan Doyle, and she published this sensational open letter. She warned that dire punishment follows any rash intruder who enters a sealed tomb. She even claimed she possessed an obscure ancient Arabic text that proved the curse was real.
That's wild. And it wasn't just novelists looking to sell books, right? So Arthur Conan Doyle himself weighed in?
Yes, he did.
Now, this is fascinating to me. Doyle is the creator of Sherlock Holmes. He is famous for creating the most logical, deductive, evidence-based character in literary history. Yet Doyle himself was a devout spiritualist.
It is quite the paradox.
It really is. And he completely fueled the global hysteria by telling the press that ancient Egyptian priests had likely created invisible elementals, which are essentially concentrated, localized spiritual guardians designed to protect the dead. He publicly suggested that one of these elemental spirits had basically assassinated Lord Carnarvon.
Which, makes perfect sense when you understand the cultural trauma of the 1920s.
How so?
Well, we have to remember this is immediately following World War I and the catastrophic 1918 influenza pandemic.
Oh, right. The death toll was staggering.
Exactly. Millions of people had just died suddenly and violently. The spiritualist movement surged because desperate, grieving people wanted to believe that the dead were not truly gone. They wanted to believe that spirits could interact with the living world.
That makes a lot of sense.
So Doyle's belief in elementals wasn't just eccentric. It resonated deeply with a traumatized public that was hungry for proof of the afterlife.
That is a profound point. The public was already primed to believe in the supernatural. But, you mentioned something earlier that really surprised me. The folklore of the mummy's curse didn't actually start with Tutankhamun in 1922. The trope was already deeply embedded in the culture long before Carter ever found those steps.
Long before. The idea of vengeful mummy was actually a staple of 19th century fiction.
Really? Like how early?
As early as 1827, Jane C. Loudon wrote a pioneering sci-fi horror novel featuring a revived, vengeful mummy.
1827.
Yes. And then in 1869, Louisa May Alcott, the author famous for writing Little Women, wrote a surprisingly dark story called Lost in a Pyramid, or The Mummy's Curse.
Wait. The author of Little Women wrote mummy horror. That is incredible.
She did, and if you analyze the literature of the 1860s and 70s, there is this recurring subgenre of stories where female mummies take magical, often violent revenge on male desecrators.
That is a very specific trope.
It is. Many modern literary analysts actually view these as proto-feminist narratives. They are essentially equating the imperialist looting and desecration of tombs with a form of violation, and giving the ancient women the power to strike back against Victorian men.
Wow. So the cultural primer was absolutely there.
Yeah.
But let's look at the historical record, even further back than Victorian literature.
Yeah.
Is there evidence of the curse phenomenon before the modern era?
Yes, there are actual historical accounts predating all of this fiction.
Tell me about those.
One of the most compelling is from 1699. A Polish traveler wrote this incredibly detailed account of buying 2 mummies in Alexandria. He decided to transport them back to Europe and stored them in the cargo hold of his ship.
Okay, that sounds like the setup to a horror movie.
It basically is, because almost immediately the voyage descended into chaos. He reported being plagued by terrifying, hyper-realistic visions of 2 ancient specters roaming the decks. Furthermore, the ship was battered by sudden, unnatural, just violently localized storms. The terror among the crew reached such a fever pitch that the storms and the hauntings only stopped when they finally dragged the mummies up from the hold and threw them overboard into the sea.
Just tossed them right into the ocean. So people have been experiencing these intense, negative phenomena around displaced Egyptian remains for centuries, which, begs the question for anyone listening, did the ancient Egyptians actually write curses on their tombs? Was casting a hex on a grave robber a real documented practice?
It was, but with some very important caveats that the 1920s media completely ignored.
Of course they did. What did they ignore?
Well, curses were actually extremely rare during the New Kingdom era, which is the specific period when Tutankhamun ruled.
Wait, really? Why is that? If they had all this wealth buried with them, wouldn't they want to protect it with every spell they had?
You would think so, but during the New Kingdom, the idea of desecrating a pharaoh's tomb was considered so fundamentally unthinkable, such a profound violation of cosmic order, or ma'at, that they rarely even bothered to write warnings against it.
It was just a given that you don't do it.
Right. They believed hiding the tombs deep in the Valley of the Kings was protection enough. However, where you do find real, explicitly brutal written curses is much earlier in history, specifically in the private tombs of the Old Kingdom.
Okay, we need to dig into this. What exactly did these Old Kingdom curses say? Because I'm guessing it wasn't just a polite keep out sign.
No, they were highly specific, legally binding, and terrifying. They were designed to threaten the physical body and the eternal soul.
Give me an example.
For instance, the mastaba tomb of Kentika Ikiki, which dates back to the 6th dynasty. It features this prominent inscription warning that any impure person who enters the tomb will face divine judgment. The deceased nobleman explicitly promises, "I shall seize his neck like a bird. I shall cast the fear of myself into him."
Seize his neck like a bird. Man, that is visceral. It implies just snapping a neck effortlessly like you would a small animal. It is really violent.
Very violent. And it gets worse. In the Pyramid of Epithenos, the ancient pyramid texts warn that anyone who disturbs the sacred space will be judged by the gods, stripped of their earthly property, and ultimately will become one who eats his own body.
Eats his own body. See, this is where my mind immediately jumps from ancient magic to physical symptoms,
How so?
Because eating your own body sounds less like a ghost story and more like a precise description of a horrific wasting disease.
That's a fascinating interpretation.
Right, like a necrosis or an aggressive cancer where the body consumes its own muscle mass, which honestly brings us back to the paranormal and the unexplained. We really should not entirely dismiss the spiritual weight of these spaces. These were structures designed by highly advanced engineers to be sacred, untouchable, and to endure forever.
I agree completely. We cannot simply write off the supernatural, or at the very least, the profound psychological and spiritual consequences of desecration. Even today, modern, highly credentialed archaeologists, people who are grounded entirely in empirical science, have experienced things they simply cannot rationally explain.
I know you found some modern accounts of this. Walk us through them, because I think this proves it didn't just stop in the 1920s.
It definitely didn't. There is a very well-documented account from a renowned modern archaeologist who was directing an excavation on a Greco-Roman site in Egypt.
Okay.
It was a standard operation, but they had to transport several significant artifacts from the site to a facility. On the exact day they moved the artifacts, the archaeologist received word that his cousin had died suddenly.
Oh, wow.
Exactly 1 year later, to the very day his uncle passed away.
To the day.
And then on the 3rd anniversary of the removal, his aunt died.
That is deeply unsettling. 3 immediate family members dying on the exact, precise anniversary of the day he removed artifacts from a sacred site. I mean, you can call it coincidence all you want, but the statistical probability of that is just staggering.
And it continued. Later in his career, this same archaeologist was involved in the delicate process of relocating 2 child mummies to a new museum exhibit.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Shortly after the move, he reported that he began suffering from severe, unrelenting nightmares. He was essentially haunted by these 2 ancient children in his dreams night after night.
That sounds exhausting.
He was rapidly deteriorating from lack of sleep, and the nightmares only stopped abruptly and completely when the mummy of the children's father was finally relocated and reunited with them in the exact same museum display case.
Wow. So how do we interpret that? Is it immense psychological guilt manifesting as night terrors? Or for those listening who keep an open mind, is there a genuine supernatural consequence to breaking the seal on a grave?
It's hard to say for sure.
I think when you are dealing with ancient Egyptian architecture places that are literally called houses of eternity, you have to respect the metaphysical intention behind them. But of course, the 1920s media didn't care about the nuance of Old Kingdom linguistics or modern psychology. They just saw a body count rapidly associating itself with Tutankhamun's tomb. And that body count did start to climb, didn't it?
It certainly did. After Lord Carnarvon's highly publicized demise, a disturbing string of people connected either directly to the tomb or to the excavation crew met untimely, often bizarre ends.
We have to look at the specifics of these victims because the manner of their deaths is exactly what fueled the hysteria.
Let's go through them.
So you have George J. Gold, a very wealthy American financier and railroad executive. He visits the tomb as a VIP guest. He goes inside, experiences the environment, and almost immediately after leaving, he contracts a sudden severe fever and dies within months. Then there's Arthur Mace. He wasn't just a visitor. He was a key central member of Carter's excavation team. He actually helped open the burial chamber. He suddenly falls ill with a mysterious pleurisy and pneumonia, rapidly wastes away, and dies.
Then you have Sir Archibald Douglas Reed.
Yes, tell us about him.
He was a prominent radiologist who was specifically invited to Egypt to take the very first X-rays of Tutankhamun's mummy. He died in 1924, just shortly after conducting his work. Now, skeptics will rightly point out that Douglas Reed died of skin cancer, which was tragically common among pioneering radiologists who worked with early, unshielded X-ray machines.
Right, the early days of X-rays were incredibly dangerous. But to the public, the nuance didn't matter at all. The man who shot radiation at the boy king died. It just adds to the dark narrative.
It feeds right into it.
And then you have the genuinely sinister cases, like Captain Richard Bethel. He was Howard Carter's personal secretary, deeply involved in the cataloging of the artifact.
His case is so strange.
It really is. In 1929, he is found dead in his bed at an exclusive, highly secure Mayfair club in London. He was a young man in seemingly perfect health. But the circumstances of his death were so profoundly suspicious that it was widely believed by authorities and the public that he had been smothered to death in his sleep.
When you stack those deaths up, fever, wasting disease, cancer, and suspected murder, it looks exactly like a curse.
It totally does.
It looks like a supernatural force picking off the desecrators one by one. But this is exactly where we have to pause and rigorously examine the skeptical, statistical view.
I know you have the numbers on this. Let's look at the hard data.
So if we strip away the emotion and look at the raw epidemiological data, out of the 58 people who were documented as being present when the tomb and the sarcophagus were opened, only 8 died within the next dozen years.
Okay, let's process that. 8 out of 58 people over 12 years.
Yeah.
That is honestly a terrible hit rate for an all-powerful ancient curse. If this is a vengeful elemental spirit, it is highly inefficient.
Exactly. The mortality rate is completely in line with standard actuarial tables for people of that age and demographic in the 1920s. And the most glaring, undeniable exception to the entire curse narrative is the primary desecrator himself.
Howard Carter.
Yes, Howard Carter. He is the man who breached the door, spent thousands of hours inside the tomb, physically dismantled the shrines, and literally removed the mummy from its coffin. If anyone was going to be struck down, it absolutely should have been him.
Right, he was ground zero.
Yet Carter lived for another 16 years after the discovery, finally passing away at the age of 64 from Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Wow.
Furthermore, Lord Carnarvon's own daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert, who was notoriously one of the very first people to sneak inside the tomb with Carter and her father before the official opening, she lived an entirely full life. She lived for another 57 years, passing away in 1980.
So if you are listening to this deep dive right now and thinking, okay, the curse is debunked, it's just statistics, we still have to answer a massive question. What actually killed Lord Carnarvon and the others so rapidly?
Yeah.
If it wasn't an ancient ghost, was it just terrible luck? Or is there a biological mechanism we are missing?
Medical science has looked very closely at Lord Carnarvon's specific case. Decades after the hysteria, a comprehensive study analyzed his medical history and pointed out a crucial fact that the 1920s press completely ignored.
Which was?
Carnarvon was already in exceedingly poor health long before he ever set foot in the Valley of the Kings. He had been in a severe car accident years prior that severely damaged his lungs. He was highly susceptible to severe respiratory infections.
Ah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So when he cut his mosquito bite, the resulting streptococcal bacterial infection simply overwhelmed an immune system that was already deeply compromised.
But what about the environment of the tomb itself?
Yeah.
Didn't modern science look into the possibility of toxic mold acting as the curse?
They did, and this forms the foundation of the biological theory. There is a very strong, well-documented scientific hypothesis regarding Aspergillus flavus.
Aspergillus flavus.
Right. This is a highly toxic, resilient type of fungus. What makes Aspergillus so insidious is its biological mechanism. It can enter a dormant state and survive for centuries, even millennia, in dark, sealed, dry environments.
Just waiting.
Yes. It survives on organic material like the vast amounts of food offerings, linen, wood, and mummified flesh packed into a pharaoh's tomb.
So it's essentially sitting there in the dark, just biding its time.
Exactly. And when a tomb is breached, the sudden influx of fresh oxygen and humidity can trigger the dormant spores to become airborne.
That sounds dangerous.
It is. When a human inhales these ancient spores, they enter the lungs. For a healthy person, their alveolar macrophages, the immune cells in the lungs, can usually destroy the spores.
Okay, good to know.
But for someone with pre-existing lung damage, like Lord Carnarvon, the spores can actually colonize the lung tissue, forming a fungal mass called an aspergilloma. This leads to a severe, rapidly fatal condition called invasive pulmonary aspergillosis.
That sounds horrific. The fungus literally grows inside your lungs. Is there historical precedent for this actually happening to archaeologists?
Yes, there is a very famous direct parallel. Researchers often compare the Tutankhamun deaths to an incident in 1973 in Krakow, Poland.
What happened there?
A team of scientists opened the long-sealed tomb of King Casimir V Jagiellon. Within a matter of days and weeks, 10 of the 12 scientists who entered the tomb died from massive, acute fungal infections in their lungs. Subsequent testing of the tomb revealed incredibly high concentrations of Aspergillus flavus.
Wow. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and where I kind of have to push back on the biological theory.
Let's hear it.
The Polish tomb incident totally makes sense. But if we apply that to Tutankhamun, the logic just falls apart for me.
Why is that?
Well, if the burial chamber was just a biohazard room full of ancient toxic Aspergillus spores, why did Howard Carter survive perfectly fine for another 16 years? He was in there breathing that stagnant air day after day, year after year. Fungal spores do not selectively infect the wealthy financier and completely ignore the guy doing the heavy lifting in the dust.
That is a very valid critique of the fungal hypothesis. It really is.
And furthermore, if it is just a fungal pneumonia, why does the ancient folklore specifically warn of a disease that no doctor can diagnose? You read the text from the Pyramid of Pepi earlier. One who eats his own body. Fungal pneumonia was a known quantity, a rapidly wasting disease that causes the body to consume itself, accompanied by severe fevers that doctors cannot identify. That sounds like something else entirely.
That exact contradiction is what has driven some fringe and mainstream researchers alike to look beyond standard biology. And this brings us to a hypothesis that completely shatters the traditional paradigm of the pharaoh's curse.
Let's get into it.
We have looked at magic and we have looked at mold. But what if the curse is a physical reality, but not a biological one? What if the danger is radiological?
Radiation. We are talking about ancient Egyptian tombs being highly radioactive. Now, on the surface, this sounds like pure science fiction. It sounds like something out of a comic book. But the data you are about to share with us is absolutely staggering.
It is genuinely unsettling when you look at the numbers. So there is this massive body of data looking at 505 modern-era Egyptologists, excavators, and tomb workers from the 19th and 20th centuries.
505 people. That is not a small sample size, right? That is a massive, statistically significant cohort.
Exactly. They weren't just looking at the Tutankhamun crew. They were looking at anyone who spent significant time excavating deep Egyptian tombs. And the pattern that emerged from the raw data is deeply alarming.
What did they find?
Out of that massive group, there was an unusually high incidence of sudden, unexpected deaths characterized by catastrophic cardiovascular failures, sudden severe hemorrhaging, and most notably, hematopoietic cancers.
Okay, let's break that medical term down so everyone listening understands the gravity of this. Based on the prefix hemato, meaning blood, we are talking about blood cancers, right?
Yes. Hematopoietic cancers are cancers that originate in the blood-forming tissue, primarily the bone marrow and the lymphatic system. We were talking about aggressive forms of leukemia, multiple myeloma, and lymphoma.
Awful stuff.
Terrible. The data show that the incidence rate of these specific rare cancers, along with nominal heart failure and strokes in this specific group of Egyptologists, was roughly 10 times higher than the expected baseline statistical rate for their demographic.
10 times higher. I mean, you do not get a 1,000% increase in bone marrow cancer from breathing in some dusty mold. And wait, let's connect the dots here. Didn't you say earlier that Howard Carter died of lymphoma?
I did. Howard Carter died of Hodgkin's lymphoma at the age of 64.
So the grand narrative that Carter escaped the curse is entirely false. He didn't escape it at all. He just received a dose that had a much longer latency period. When you look at the acute symptoms suffered by many of these early explorers who died quickly, the sudden, profound exhaustion, the severe nausea, the inexplicable hemorrhaging, the cytocardiovascular collapse, and these rare blood disorders. These are textbook clinical symptoms of acute radiation sickness.
They absolutely are. We have to look at the physical mechanism of how ionizing radiation affects the human body.
Walk us through it.
High doses of radiation physically shear the DNA inside your cells. It specifically targets rapidly dividing cells, which is why the bone marrow is destroyed so quickly. When the bone marrow is irradiated, it loses the ability to produce new blood cells. This condition is called pancytopenia.
And what does that do to a person?
Well, without white blood cells, you become instantly vulnerable to any minor infection like, say, a mosquito bite. Right. And without platelets, your blood cannot clot, leading to internal hemorrhaging. It perfectly mirrors the ancient curse of wasting away, and it perfectly explains the sudden severe fevers that baffled 1920s doctors because the clinical pathology of radiation sickness simply wasn't fully understood yet.
This is mind-blowing. But as a skeptic, I have to say, you cannot just throw out a terrifying concept like ancient localized radiation without a smoking gun. We need empirical proof. Do we have physical, instrumental proof that these specific ancient Egyptian structures are emitting radiation today?
We do. Modern physicists and environmental researchers have taken highly sensitive readings inside various Old Kingdom tomb ruins, specifically targeting the deep structures at Saqqara and Giza.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about normal trace background radiation.
Right, because we should clarify for the listener, all rocks naturally emit a tiny fractional bit of background radiation.
Exactly. We are constantly exposed to trace amounts of radiation from the Earth and from space. But limestone, which constitutes the vast majority of the pyramids and the surrounding bedrock of the tomb sites, is a sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rocks rarely emit any significant measurable radiation.
Okay, so what did they find?
When researchers placed dosimeters and air quality sensors inside these deep tombs, they measured astonishing ambient concentrations of radon gas.
Radon gas.
Right. Radon is a direct radioactive decay product of uranium. To give you the baseline, the World Health Organization strictly states that the maximum safe indoor limit for radon exposure for a human being is 100 becquerels per cubic meter.
100 becquerels. That is the absolute ceiling for safety. What were the specific readings inside the tombs?
In the deep chambers of the Sekhem-Khet Pyramid at Saqqara, researchers recorded radon readings reaching up to 5,809 becquerels per cubic meter.
Over 5,800. That is nearly 60 times the safe limit. I mean, I want the listener to really picture this. Think about walking into an abandoned, sealed containment building at Chernobyl without a dosimeter or a hazmat suit.
You wouldn't even know it was happening.
Exactly. You wouldn't feel the radiation. You wouldn't smell it. But every second you stand in that chamber, it would be invisibly sinking into your bones, shearing your cellular structure apart. But let's apply some logic here. Sedimentary limestone bedrock simply does not naturally produce highly localized, lethal levels of uranium decay out of nowhere.
No, it doesn't.
So where on earth is this massive source of invisible fire coming from?
To answer that question, we have to take the deepest dive possible into architectural, geological, and textual evidence of the Old Kingdom. We have to entertain a staggering, paradigm-shifting hypothesis.
I am ready. What is it?
The hypothesis is that the earliest monumental structures in Egypt, the mastabas, were not originally designed as romantic resting places for deceased kings. They were actually designed and engineered as deep underground containment bunkers for highly radioactive material.
Okay, my mind is completely blown. Let's look at the architectural engineering. A mastaba is an earlier structure than a pyramid. What does it actually look like, and why are you comparing it to a modern nuclear bunker?
A mastaba is a massive, flat-roofed, rectangular structure with outward-sloping sides. They basically look like giant stone benches sitting on the desert floor. But the key to understanding them is not what is above ground, it is what lies beneath.
What's down there?
If you excavate a mastaba, you find vertical shafts dug straight down, sometimes up to 30 meters deep into the solid bedrock.
30 meters straight down.
Yes. And at the very bottom of these massive shafts are offset hidden chambers. Inside these chambers, early excavators found massive, incredibly heavy stone coffers. But here's the anomaly. These coffers were not made of the surrounding easily carved limestone.
What were they made of?
They were meticulously carved from dense basalt or dacite, which are materials that had to be quarried and dragged from hundreds of miles away.
Why go through all that trouble? Why is that specific imported stone so important to this theory?
Because basalt and dacite are incredibly dense, hard, igneous rocks. On the Mohs hardness scale, they are vastly superior to limestone. But more importantly, if you are designing a modern nuclear waste storage facility today, dense igneous rock is exactly the type of geological shielding you utilize to block and contain ionizing radiation.
Wow.
Furthermore, when archaeologists first found these 30-meter shafts, they weren't open stairwells for priests to casually walk down and leave offerings. They were found deliberately and painstakingly backfilled with thousands of tons of loose rubble all the way to the top and then sealed over.
So they didn't want anyone getting back in.
It was engineered to be completely inaccessible. That is exactly how we cap deep geological repositories for hazardous nuclear waste in the 21st century.
So let me get this straight. You have a 30-meter deep underground bedrock shaft. It is deliberately backfilled with rubble to prevent access. At the bottom is an offset chamber containing a massive box made of imported radiation-shielding dense rock. And today, that exact space is currently leaking lethal levels of radon gas.
That's the reality of it.
That is the exact definition of a containment breach. But surely the ancient Egyptians didn't write about nuclear waste. When we read the hieroglyphs, they talk about gods, magic, the afterlife, and mythology, right?
Well, this is where we have to fundamentally reevaluate how we translate ancient Egyptian texts.
What do you mean?
For over a century, Victorian and modern Egyptologists have translated documents like the Book of the Dead and the Coffin texts exclusively through a religious, metaphorical, and mythological lens. They assume everything is a poetic metaphor for the sun and the soul.
Sure, that makes sense for the time.
But if you strip away that Victorian romanticism and look at the literal, direct translations of the words used, a terrifyingly different picture emerges.
Give me a specific example. What are these texts literally saying?
The texts frequently describe magic food or specific offerings that must be given to the deceased to power their literal transformation into a being of light. The hieroglyphs specifically mention saffron cakes.
Saffron cakes.
Saffron, of course, is distinctly yellow. And the texts dictate that these yellow cakes must be given in very specific mathematical proportions to achieve the reaction. They state this magic food is portioned out as 2, then 3, then 5.
2, 3, 5. 2, 3. Are you telling me they are referencing uranium-235, yellow cake uranium?
Yellow cake is the literal industrial term we use today for the crude, concentrated powder form of uranium ore, and U-235 is the exact specific isotope of uranium that is fissile. It is the isotope required to sustain a nuclear fission chain reaction.
That is wild.
The coincidence of ancient texts describing yellow saffron cakes that must be proportioned as 235 to create an immense burning power is, well, frankly, it stretches the limits of mere coincidence.
That isn't just a coincidence. That is a chemical formula hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
How do the texts describe this magic actually functioning?
The texts describe the magic as an invisible efflux. An efflux is an emanation, an outflowing of energy that you cannot see. The texts explicitly and repeatedly state that this invisible efflux causes fear, trembling, sickness, and a literal burning power.
Wow.
It speaks of the physical body being completely transformed and destroyed by this invisible fire.
That sounds exactly like the clinical progression of acute radiation exposure. The burning power, the invisible emanation that causes trembling and sickness. But wait, if they were transforming a body, what about the byproduct? Does the ancient text explicitly mention waste?
It does, and this is perhaps the most compelling textual evidence of all.
I'm on the edge of my seat.
The texts state directly that the dead physical body of Osiris, who is the source of this immense power in the mythology, is excrement. It is literal waste. And the text stresses a crucial detail. It says this waste is everlasting.
Everlasting waste.
Yes. It warns mankind to get as far away from it as possible, stating categorically that this filth, this everlasting excrement, must be buried deep in the cavern of the underworld because it causes terror, sickness, and destruction.
They literally called it everlasting waste that had to be buried deep underground to prevent widespread terror and disease. We're looking at a 5,000-year-old hazmat warning. But if this was a highly volatile material, do we have any physical geological evidence of this intense burning power ever going out of control? Was there an ancient meltdown?
We might actually have evidence of exactly that.
Where?
If you look at the Great Pyramid of Giza, specifically inside the king's chamber, there is profound physical damage that entirely defies standard architectural or geological explanation.
Like what?
The massive, multi-ton granite roof beams above the chamber are cracked in half, and in some places they are violently forced out of position by up to 3 inches.
That takes an incredible amount of force.
It does, but the structural damage isn't even the strangest part. The internal granite walls of the king's chamber are heavily vitrified.
Explain vitrification for the listener. That means the stone was turned into glass, right?
Yes, exactly. The granite blocks possess a bizarre chocolate brown, glistening surface because they have been baked by extreme, localized, unnatural heat. The very edges of the stone blocks actually show physical signs of melting and fusing together.
Melting granite.
Right. Now, granite has a melting point of around 1,200 degrees Celsius. There is absolutely no combination of wood fires, torches, or ancient oil lamps that could ever produce that kind of sustained, localized, intense heat inside a stone room without completely suffocating the fire from lack of oxygen.
So, mathematically, either there was a catastrophic high-temperature thermal event inside that enclosed chamber or what? If this was some form of early nuclear technology or concentration of radioactive material, did it go wrong? Did they experience a massive contamination event that forced them to abandon the site?
The historical timeline strongly suggests they did experience a catastrophic event. Let's look at the reign of King Joshua's, which is around 2650 BCE.
Okay, what happened then?
The ancient texts record that a severe, horrifying plague stalked the land of Egypt during this exact time. The historical lamentations describe that a burning power went forth, making women barren, causing sickness, and destroying mankind.
Making women barren. That's another radiation symptom.
Exactly. And crucially, it explicitly blames this plague on senseless people who divulged the magic spells of the cursed, inaccessible place.
It sounds like someone breached the containment bunkers, maybe tomb robbers looking for gold, dug down into those 30-meter shafts and cracked open the basalt coffers, completely unaware of what was actually inside.
And by doing so, they unleashed the invisible fire upon the population. In response to this catastrophic plague, King Djoser initiated what can only be described in modern terms as a massive, desperate environmental remediation and cleanup effort.
A cleanup effort?
Yes. He ordered the systematic relocation of an estimated 40,000 stone pots and vessels from the early compromised tombs at Abydos. These vessels were transported hundreds of miles down the Nile River, and they were reburied deep underneath his new, massive construction project, the Step Pyramid at Saqqara.
Wait. So Djoser didn't just build a massive pyramid to show off his ego. He essentially built a gigantic concrete and stone sarcophagus over 40,000 leaking radioactive containers, just like we did at Chernobyl.
Exactly. And the archaeological record beautifully backs this theory up.
How so?
When modern archaeologists excavated those original emptied tombs at Abydos, they found that the structures had been systematically purged with intense fire. The underground vaults were completely burned out.
Wow.
Using fire is a standard, albeit primitive, method of trying to decontaminate a highly toxic or biologically compromised site. From that point forward in history, the specific desert area around these deeply buried vaults was referred to in the ancient Egyptian language as Tadjezer, which translates to the isolated, separated, or cleared land.
And if you trace the etymology of that concept, that word eventually evolved into the Arabic word haram, meaning strictly forbidden or prohibited. The local people knew for thousands of years not to go near those specific structures, not because they were afraid of ghosts, but because it was a designated hazard zone.
Which leaves us with a profound, ultimately unresolved question that challenges everything we know about human history.
What is that?
How did this happen? Are we looking at fragmentary evidence of a lost, highly advanced ancient civilization that actually utilized nuclear power, suffered a cataclysm, and had to hastily bury its everlasting waste? Or is there a more grounded yet equally terrifying possibility? Is it possible that early Bronze Age people simply stumbled upon a massive, naturally occurring, highly concentrated geological deposit of uranium? Maybe they mined it, thinking it was a beautiful, magical, glowing rock. They brought it back to their cities, realized it was giving everyone the wasting disease, and created an elaborate, desperate religious ritual to bury it deep underground inside dense basalt, wrapping it in strict theological warnings never to touch it again.
That is just incredible, because at the end of the day, whether they understood the quantum physics of isotopes or they just thought it was the angry, burning magic of the gods, the practical result is exactly the same.
It really is.
They knew it was deadly. They knew it was everlasting, and they tried their absolute hardest to bury it and keep us away from it.
If we synthesize this entire journey we've been on today, it is quite a ride.
It has been amazing.
We started in 1922 with Howard Carter, Lord Carnarvon, and the highly romanticized discovery of a boy king's gold. We moved through the deep psychological trauma and hysteria of the 1920s media, conjuring up Victorian ghosts and elemental spirits to explain sudden deaths. We examined the perfectly rational biological theories of ancient fungal spores like Aspergillus flavus colonizing the lungs.
And we ended up staring into the chilling, heavily fortified possibility of ancient radioactive nuclear waste containment bunkers perfectly disguised as tombs.
But here is the true, profound convergence of the paranormal and the scientific. It doesn't matter what you believe. Whether it is a vengeful spiritual elemental, a 3,000-year-old dormant cloud of toxic mold, or a lethal invisible dose of uranium-235 emitting radon gas, the end result for the trespasser is exactly the same.
Death by a disease that no doctor can diagnose. The ancients left incredibly clear warnings. They called the land Haram, forbidden. They isolated the spaces. The curses literally promised horrific physical deterioration and the destruction of the body. They did absolutely everything in their power to say, do not enter. And modern humanity, completely blinded by greed, historical curiosity, and sheer arrogance, dug them up anyway.
It makes you think deeply about our own future, you know?
Yeah, how so?
Today, right now, modern scientists and linguists struggle immensely to design warning symbols for our own nuclear waste dumps. Places like Yucca Mountain in the United States, or the Onklo Deep Geological Repository in Finland.
Right, because how do you communicate danger forever?
Exactly. We have massive panels of experts, linguists, and artists trying to figure out how to communicate the concept of invisible danger to humans 10,000 years in the future. We're trying to design hostile architecture and symbols, knowing full well that our current languages will die, our civilizations will fall, and our current hazard symbols will completely lose their meaning.
Wow. If you're listening to this, just think about that for a second. What if the Egyptian curse was exactly that? What if it was simply their version of a biohazard sign, a terrifying myth, meticulously designed and culturally embedded to endure for millennia, specifically crafted to terrify future generations into staying the hell away from a deadly, invisible fire?
It is a deeply sobering thought, because if the curse was just a biohazard warning wrapped in religion and mythology, well, it failed. We didn't listen to the warning.
We never do. Thank you for joining us in the dark today, everyone. As always, we want to know what you think about all of this. Is it a lost technology? Is it a naturally occurring uranium deposit that ancient people misunderstood? Or are the spirits of the pharaohs truly restless and striking back? Drop your theories in the comments section of the YouTube video, and please don't forget to like and subscribe so the algorithm knows you want more, and so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unknown. Until next time, respect the warnings and leave the buried things in the ground.